Okay, so this is my second study for this weekend. Yesterday, we began to look at the significance of 2024. And the reason for this is to answer a number of questions. I mentioned the question concerning the repeating pattern. My intention and my hope is that by exploring 2024, and that year's prophetic significance, we not only answer that question, but a number of other questions as well. Because as I understand it, the repeating pattern is only a small part of what has been done away with. Of what's no longer helpful to us in trying to understand the plan of salvation. So we compared ancient Israel and modern Israel. We discussed how ancient Israel had a limited understanding of God's law. And that limitation forced God to relate to them in a certain way. We call that the Old Covenant. And the purpose of the Old Covenant was to take care of ancient Israel, help them to grow up until they became mature enough to have a more complete understanding of God's law. Once that maturity had been achieved, and remember, we are not discussing the maturity of individual Jews. We are talking about the maturity of their prophetic understanding. Once that point had arrived, the Jewish system was no longer necessary. To put it bluntly, the Jewish system was an alternative version of reality. It was a really childish version of how the world works. And in some ways, it was fake. It was not real. No king was coming to sit on David's throne. Literal Jerusalem was not going to stand forever. But God used that language. Because that's what they understood at that time. When the fullness of time had arrived, the end of the 490 years, then that entire Jewish system was to be set aside. Because they now had a better system to take its place. A more universal system, a more equal system. The same can be said about modern Israel. The Adventist and Christian perspectives of the end of the world is an alternative version of reality. The Adventist and Christian perspectives of relationships between people and nations and God the perspectives are childish and in some ways fake. And so, in order to understand reality, like ancient Israel, we have had to be forced to come out of our Christian bubble and see the world as it is. The French Revolution, the capturing of the Pope, what that represented was the rejection of Christianity in politics.
Sorry, Blessing, are you writing something? Because we don't see. We see your screen, but if you are writing something, we don't see.
Ah, I'm not writing anything at the moment.
Okay, sorry. Just to
No, that's
confirm.
fine. That's okay. So 1798 was a repudiation of Christianity in government. People were tired of Christian thinking shaping their world and how they should behave. So even though the world was changing in 1798, most people maintained a Christian worldview. More people than just the Millerites. And I think this is why there's been a tension between our prophetic expectations and the reality. Because we had a fake version of reality. But this is why this movement was raised up. To transition us to reality. A consequential teacher among us was Tess Lambert. And what she did is begin this shift from a Christian prophetic framework to a more universal one. One that could address the United Nations. One that could speak about China. That could explain what was happening in South America and in Africa. Really the changes that are happening all over the world. So if you studied Tess's material, and if you remember a lot of what she taught, then these current studies will make sense. And when I say studied, I don't mean having watched the videos or participated in the Zoom meetings. I mean taking time personally to look at those things and see if they were so. If you actually have made it a habit to verify these things, it will be easier for you to understand what's being said now. If you haven't made it a habit, then it will be much harder for you to understand what's being said now. Translation to political ideas, particularly political ideas about how the world should operate. Try to summarize how the old world worked and how the new world works. In the old world, kings ruled supreme. They would change the world through law or through war. In the new world, it's more complicated because power is distributed. So I put 3 circles to represent the distribution of power. These are not necessarily the 3 branches of government. One could be government. The other one could be academia and media. The other one could be business. And there could be others. Different institutions in society shape our world. And this design was intentional. It was to move away from the idea of one person having all power. So as a result, If change needs to happen, there's more people involved. And so you have to discuss. You have to strike deals, create coalitions. And so that's why a law that's passed by Congress, as important as it might be, is not sufficient to change a political order. So the studies done by Terry Lambert on QFMG shattered our Christian prophetic framework. Showed that it was no longer sufficient to explain the end of the world. We know that our message is equality, equal rights. The Sunday Law prophetic model focuses on Christians other people are only treated as individuals. And there's no full clarity about what will happen to them. What I mean by that is when a question would be asked, what is going to happen to a Buddhist that doesn't know the Sabbath truth? The only answer that could be given is they'll be judged according to the light they have. And also, what was meant by that statement is that God will do the judging. While there was some truth to that, that people's experience would be considered. In how their individual situations will be handled. It was a very limited understanding. The questions that could be answered with clarity and confidence are the ones that related to the Christian world. What would happen to Christians that don't accept the Sabbath truth? They'll die. What would happen to those that haven't had an opportunity to hear? There would be evangelism, the loud cry. So there was a lot more clarity about Christians and the Christian experience. Very limited, if anything, about anyone else. And when it came to institutions like governments, China didn't have a role in end time prophecy. So I wouldn't talk about it. Whatever China would do didn't matter. But if you ask anyone living in the real world today, they'll tell you what happens with China really does matter. My point being, it's not that the Christian prophetic framework we had was bad. My point is, it was very limited and also very limiting. There's many things we would not be able to see or understand. And so a better one needed to be created. So we made a step forward with the shift from Sunday to gender. Because we recognized that gender was a very important subject in our time. But depending on how you looked at this, it could also be very limiting. Because you'd end up just focusing on women. Or events that relate specifically to gender. So events that have to do with geopolitics could easily be missed with that kind of model. If not handled properly. And the reason I say if not handled properly is because feminism was actually meant to teach us something. Not just about women's rights, but about how men and women should relate to each other, and about how governments should relate to each other. As has been taught in the past, feminism covers everything, just like its opposite counterpart, patriarchy. And when we view feminism this way, it's a complete framework that can explain our world. It can help us to understand the plan of salvation better. So when we would come to the Republican National Convention of 2024, the promise, the main promise of that convention was to destroy the liberal international order. We have not gotten into why there was that promise. Because the party would not promise something that wasn't popular with the people. It wouldn't make sense because they wanted to win the election. So the fact that they promised it should tell you that there was enough people that wanted it. So I'm suggesting that the rejection of feminism that we were supposed to see at the Sunday law was not just the rejection of abortion rights or gender affirming care. But rather it was the rejection of the liberal international order. The order that says, let's live together in peace. Let's live together as equals. So that event was meant to show us a number of things. So first, we're supposed to see that this is an issue that covered everyone. So this was July 2024. The RNC. And the promise is we will destroy the liberal international order. And I'm saying it affects everyone. And only a universal prophetic framework can identify this. So we move from a Christian one to a universal one. But what we should have also been able to see is a clue of what our work is. We always knew that our work has something to do with setting up a kingdom. That's not anything new. But what we thought is that what's being set up is a Christian kingdom. But that can't be correct because what's being destroyed is not a Christian order that only deals with the Christian world. It's an order that affects everyone. The global world. So what replaces the liberal international order set up by the USA? If the order that's destroyed is for everyone, then what replaces it must be for everyone. Must impact everyone, account for everyone. And I want to suggest that it wasn't the responsibility of Donald Trump and his movement to replace the liberal international order. It was their prophetic responsibility to destroy the existing one. If you go back to ancient Israel, this is a progressive work. When you get to 34 AD, you have a shift from the Jewish to the universal. And they continue to go through history. History continues. And they get to 70 AD. And we know what happens here is the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. So by the time you get to 34 AD, I'll say it this way. Jerusalem is marked for destruction. So if you're observant enough, if you're a good student of prophecy, you could see at this point, 34 AD, that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, even though the destruction happened 70 AD. And the Romans fulfill that responsibility. Similarly, if you're observant enough, you could have seen in 2024 that the rules-based international order was going to be officially set aside. So by the time you would get to January of 2026, when it actually happened, you would not be surprised. Venezuela is just a proxy for that development. I'm not going to take the time to explain all of that today. So the point I'm trying to make right now is that just as the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, it has been the responsibility of the Seventh Kingdom under Trump to destroy the liberal international system. This work continues to happen. Recently, the Trump administration identified their intention to dismantle the International Criminal Court. So there's many institutions being turned upside down. I do not want to suggest that the work is completed. But the important turning point did happen. And the important turning point was the capture of Maduro in January. But the work of replacing what's being destroyed the history of ancient Israel should tell us, give us a clue on whose job that is. It was the Christian church's job to set up the structures for the universal kingdom within their context. And therefore, it is the responsibility of this movement to set up not a Christian kingdom, but a universal one. A truly universal one. And this was also made evident by our understanding of equality under the law. Which was a discussion had in Slovakia in July of 2024. Because when we discuss this concept of equality under the law, it includes what Curtis has been taking us through. The relationship of equals between God and humanity. And if we are equal partners, then you don't have one entity doing everything. In our Christian model, in our Christian understanding, God was the boss. God is going to do all the judging. God will determine who goes to heaven and who doesn't. And God will set up the kingdom. All we need to do is just obey. Obey what God says. Don't question. Don't think about it. Just obey. I want to say strongly, this is not what feminism came to teach us. We know how ugly it is. Now, when you've got a man who will tell a woman what to do and how to behave. The woman can't think for herself, cannot make her own decisions, is not an equal partner with the man. When we now look at this, we hate it. We say this is ugly. And it is. But most of us still love a patriarchal idea about God. where God is the superior and humanity is inferior. God makes all the decisions and we just submit to them. If we're to be honest to ourselves, most of us still do not think this is ugly. But it is. What we think is ugly is you've got God here and humanity here, and the two are equals. The decisions that this entity makes are as important and binding as the decisions that this entity makes. Because what they're using is the same understanding of the law. This is beautiful. And I can hope we can all see that. As beautiful as it is when two human beings interact as equals. So no, it's not God's job to do all the judging. And it's not God's job to do all the setting up of this kingdom. We have the responsibility to do a lot of that. And we're not submitting to God's perspective. Because we have all the information we need to understand the law, we can just look at the law and make a decision. We can answer the questions. What's going to happen to this person or that person? How is a government supposed to operate? How is it not supposed to operate? This is the new covenant. The one where the Bible says, you will not need someone to tell you what it means to know the Lord. The promise is all will know God. The promise is everyone will know God. Which really means everyone will know the law. It is your right and privilege to understand these things. You don't have to wait for a clever teacher to tell you what to believe or to tell you what to do. What you have to do is take the rules, take the law of equal rights, and use it to measure everything that you see. Examine yourself. Examine your belief system. See if the way you read the Bible verses or the Bible or the spirit of prophecy actually is an agreement whether the way you read is in agreement with the law of equal rights. Because if it isn't, then you know that thing is not useful to you anymore. Now, I want to give a bit of a personal perspective on religion. Because we've spoken quite a bit about Judaism and Christianity and Adventism. So I'm going to give my perspective, what I am saying, at least, so that it's clear. I am not saying 2024 is the end of religion. So it's not the end of religion. We are a religious movement. We have been, and we still are. Religion was given to humanity for their benefit. Religion helps to minister to a number of issues or questions. Questions about identity. Questions about destiny. Even issues to do with community. And a number of other things. I'll just summarize it by saying religion is meant to minister to quality of life. Human beings are pattern seekers. By design. We constantly try to make sense of ourselves and of the world around us. And this is why people often fall prey to conspiracy theories because they're looking for answers. Even atheists have a religious framework. They might reject the idea of a supreme being, but they still have ideas about who they are, where they came from, and where we're all going. Atheism meets the bar of a religion. So the point that I'm trying to make, in fact, before I say that, for most of humanity, we have been, we've only had two options. Option A is accept a supreme being and their control over your life. Absolute control over your life. Option B is reject the supreme being and just live however you want. So live anyhow. So both options have been tried by humans. And I want to say both have been unfulfilling. With option A, people have suppressed their wills and their emotions against their design to great damage to themselves and others. Whether these people have been in mainstream religions or in cults, or same effect. And then those that would reject the supreme being have had to live life, I'll say it this way, constantly battling with their conscience. So they do what they want, but at the back of their mind, they have to constantly fight with the thought of having consequences, or thoughts that might suggest that a supreme being actually does exist and that they would have to confront them one day. So they might not believe that, but I'm saying they have to actively work to fight any hint of that. So in both options, what you end up having is cognitive dissonance. This is something that's been taught in the movement for many years now. It's basically living a lie. You lie to yourself one way or the other. Those that accept option A lie to themselves that either they enjoy what the Supreme Being is telling them to do, or that somehow that Supreme Being has people's best interests at heart and they can't explain it well. Whatever the case, there's a contradiction between their belief system and their experience. And in many cases, they don't even fully live up to what their belief system says. There's also a contradiction with those that accept option B. Either things they can't explain, or they just live their lives without a meaningful framework. I personally think both cases are quite miserable to be in. But one thing I will mention is that those that accept option A are just entirely living for their survival. Do what the Supreme Being says, or else you will die. Those that are in option B, there are some aspects of survival, but they also take a step closer to happiness because they're trying to fulfill their life. They're actually doing what they want. But I'll just say something's missing. And what I think this movement has done, which I don't think any other institution on this planet has, is introduce a third option. A supreme being exists, but they operate under law, under the law of equal rights. So they do not have absolute control over your life, but also have the responsibility to facilitate for you life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think that's a unique model. I also think it's a better model because you can make decisions as a person knowing that a framework exists to support you in your journey of self-discovery. And a framework that will help you to know how best to live life. So you have agency, meaning you make your own decisions. But it also teaches you that good relationships, so relationships based on equal rights, are the best for happiness or quality of life. So most people, I think, could be wrong, but I think most people in organized religion and that includes most of us, are on option A. The reason why we are in religion is because of survival. We want to avoid death. Very few of us conceptualize the idea of accepting religion purely because that religion ministers to our happiness. It helps us live better lives. What makes me suspect that most of us are on option A is the questions that have come up. If there is no difference between us and them, then what's the point of being in this movement? So I won't answer the question directly. I will not. But I will say this. I'll borrow a term from Paul. When he spoke about Christians that only had faith in Jesus, for this life, he said, if only in this life you have faith in Jesus, meaning you didn't believe in the resurrection, you are of all people most miserable. The opposite of happiness is misery. And if only to avoid death you are in this movement, I'd like to suggest to you that you're of all people most miserable. And I'm not saying this in an insulting way. I hope we'll actually take time to reflect. If being in this movement, just for the sake of it, doesn't make you happy, that means you're not happy. And I think it would be important for you as a person to actually reflect on that and decide what to do. Whether to change how you view religion, how you understand the plan of salvation, or you pursue another course. But the last thing I would like to say in closing is that I believe religion will be a permanent feature of the human experience. Just like culture. Toxic cultures will be destroyed for sure. But as long as humans exist and they live together, cultures will form. In a similar way, toxic religions are being destroyed and are going to be destroyed. But religion as a human phenomenon will remain. And I think this movement is providing a template for what healthy religion looks like. It doesn't separate the world and God. So God looks at the church one way and God looks at the world another way. It doesn't do that. It looks at things in a cohesive, universal way, as was meant to be at the beginning. And so we always talk about politics. We even talk about participating in voting, as an example. But another important thing that I think this movement teaches us or provides is that even with principles of universality, even in a perfect world, so heaven is not going to be a Jewish heaven. It's not going to be an Adventist heaven. It's not going to be a Christian heaven. We're not going to any of these. So we're going to a universal one. But even in a universal one, you will have religion. But what you will have is not religious uniformity, but religious diversity. As was taught a few weeks ago, human beings will never see things in exactly the same way. So people will never see God in exactly the same way. And that is something to be embraced, not feared. So I hope it will be clear to you all that when I'm saying 2024 marked the end of this Christian framework, Christian ideas and institutions, it was not the end of religion. Because what this movement has done has put together universal ideas and universal institutions that provide a foundation for healthy government and healthy religion. We'll continue from here next time. Let's pray. Dear God, we're grateful that we have the opportunity to be in relationship with you. To know things that many humans would wish to know. I pray that we see how privileged we are. And how much better our lives can be. Even in this present world, full of pain and equality. We can truly be happy. Amen.
I'd like to thank Blessing for that presentation. And our next presentation in this series will be in 2 weeks' time. On Friday, the 14th of August. I want to thank the technical team and the translators. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. God bless.